When it comes to product development, there are many risks that you will encounter. In this video workshop, we're going to go over some of them so that you can be better prepared and reduce the total amount of risk that you take on during your product development process. This process also works for other kinds of program design. This is workshop number 2 in the Steps to a Sale-Ready Product workshop series, created in partnership with LITE. If you haven't watched the first video in the series, I'd recommend you start there, then come back here. There's a link to the full playlist in the description of this video. There are several different areas of risk that you should consider throughout your design process. We'll be focusing on the following 4 categories of risk. Desirability or product market fit risks, which is where the customers just don't care about what you're making. There's viability or financial risks, where the customers are either unwilling to pay enough or the costs are too high for you to run your operations. There's feasibility and operational risks, where we can't even provide the intended value due to some kind of operational issues. Or there's adaptability risks, where the external environment and all of the legal, social, and other forces that are outside of your organization that you have to consider just make things challenging. We're going to get to each of these and why they're important, as well as go through some exercises so that you will have a list of the most likely and impactful risks facing your product development process, as well as having some prevention efforts and contingency plans. For the activities in this workshop, we'll put the instructions on the screen and you can pause this video and do the activity for yourself. Each activity will have a recommended time, and some will also have instruction graphics for you to draw out. We recommend writing out notes throughout the activities and sharing them with your team if you have one, or bringing questions you have to a trusted mentor. The first 2 activities in this workshop are intended to get a baseline and to get you thinking about what you've already done, or to get your first impressions when it comes to planning around risk. To start, please take 3 minutes to do a brainstorm of the various problems or challenges you've encountered or expect to encounter when it comes to creating a new product. Okay, when we think about the problems that you've identified in this first activity, you're going to make a list of the responses to those problems and what results are likely to occur following those reactions. What is your reasoning for each of your responses? Are there other options for how you might respond to each challenge? We'll take another 3 minutes for this activity. You should now have a list of where you're starting. I want you to look back at the problems you've listed and check against the list of the 4 different types of risks I mentioned at the beginning of the video. How many of the risks or challenges were product market fit problems, where the thing you were making either might not resonate with the customers or where they don't see the point? How many are viability risks, where the core of the problem was about prices that the customers were or weren't willing to pay, or were based on the cost of prototyping or production? How many were about the feasibility of the product, where the main issue was if you could actually reliably create the product as advertised? And finally, how many were about adaptability, or were problems from external sources, such as complying with regulations, fitting within a cultural expectation, or dealing with other external intangible factors? Take note of the types of problems that are in your list. Most people gravitate towards problems that they either find they're better able to solve themselves, or those that they fear the most. If you find that one or more categories is missing in your initial brainstorm, I would encourage you to put a little extra effort into including elements of risk from those categories as we go on to the rest of the workshop. Now, there are some core risks to product development that you will have to work through, and if you've watched the first video in the series, you've already been working on lowering your risk of not having good product market fit. By focusing on the customer, their needs, wants, and pains, you'll be more likely to create a product that works for them. In one of my previous attempts to create products, I'd partnered with a couple of different artists and photographers that I knew, and I'd put together a plan to print their work on a variety of products to see if we could sell them together. There were a variety of risks and problems that I had to deal with when working on this kind of product. First were the relationships with the artists. I'd be unable to sell any objects that had their work printed on them without their continued permission. Arranging for clear expectations of who gets paid and how much for each sale, as well as how long would I have permission to sell off existing stock if they decided to leave the group, were important risks to have figured out before committing and getting things printed. How interested customers would find out about us and our work is another part of the puzzle that we needed to figure out, as well as creating systems for completing the transactions and getting the customers their products. This was a challenge, and the products that we were developing didn't go very far because our assumptions were that it would be easier to sell the art than it actually was. And there were other more established players in the market that were already set up in places that worked really well to sell this kind of product. If I were to try this kind of product again, I would start by working on building up a following of people interested in a particular style of art through social media posting, engaging within arts communities, and scouting local markets and events with vendor halls. This would increase the chances that what we're making would be a better fit for both the local market and whatever international market we find in that subculture. I would also make sure to have clear contracts for how the artwork would be licensed from the artists, for what length of time, and for specific terms for how each party could leave the project. Contracts, contracts, contracts. They're massively important for laying out the expectations and benefits for both parties in a deal, and the agreements we had made for this initiative were not as strong or as clear as they should have been. Now, for more other examples, I'm going to throw it to Ian Roundtree, the Executive Director of LITE, with an explanation of how they responded when some of the risks to their operations did occur.
Let me rewind a little bit. It's 2020. Everything is changing. Nietzsche Foods is gone. The North End is losing a lot of its local grocery support. We have no one to buy from for our hamper, or at least not the same partners that we used to. So what do we do about that? Well, we could go to the national chains, we could do the usual charity thing, or we could take some of the lessons that we've learned over the past year working with our partners to develop products, and we could do something different, just like we've always done. In 2020, we could not have our usual November fundraiser. The annual Blueberry Pancake Breakfast has been a staple in our community for almost 30 years. This year in 2024, it's at its 27th year, being a community event where we gather a lot of people together and celebrate the work that we've done in the community, celebrate our partners, and just have breakfast. And it's a good opportunity for us to get together with people that we otherwise don't see for the rest of the year, but also just to focus on our partners exclusively for a day. But we couldn't do that. So instead, our then executive director, Jonah Pierce, came up with an idea. We would do a live stream, and instead of bringing people to the pancake breakfast, we would send the pancake breakfast to them. So we developed the first of our food products. It was a simple pancake recipe that was made and packaged for us by our partner Marymount. The logos were designed by Vincent Design, which is also here in the Social Enterprise Center where I'm located. And it was put together in not a lot of time, but we sold it as a care package with the pancake mix. There was a wild blueberry jam that was made by Minan, who we partner with regularly, and a number of other things was delivered to people's houses in a contactless way. We were very careful about that, by another one of our partners named Scope. So even just delivering the breakfast in a new way in 2020 when everything was changing, took a lot of sort of planning and thinking in a direction that we weren't used to. But now suddenly we had this new process of creating food products. And that was done first for our fundraiser, but in the following year, it really helped us address the problem of not having a local community grocery partner anymore.
So LITE has taken an iterative approach in their product development to have a better sense of what their community values, what is commercially viable, and which products achieve both goals. In the examples that Ian shared, they had to work through the risks of losing their primary supplier, as well as having to change the format of a long-running fundraiser. They responded by finding ways to keep partner organizations as involved as possible and shifting to a format that could be delivered within the context of the pandemic. When it comes to LITE's model for product development, they're a charity focused on improving employment opportunities for people with barriers to employment in Winnipeg. Because of that focus, every product that they designed that created a job experience for a participant was already a win for the organization on the charity side. The products that sold well enough to cover costs, and where the excess, whatever was left after other sales, could be donated to other local nonprofits. These were especially successful products based on their mission delivery metrics for success as a charity. According to Ian, we're delivering on mission by doing this, regardless if the products sell or not. We want them to sell so we can do it repeatedly, but the risk looks different to us because we're a charity doing these activities. Some of LITE's cornerstone products now are pancake mix and packaged soup products that they've developed. When thinking about their product development process, what are some of the internal problems that you can think of that they might have had to solve or plan for in their product development process? What might have been some of the external problems? Some of the internal ones include recipe creation, which the risk there is it a good recipe? Do customers like it? When it comes to, let's say, the task of purchase, process, and fulfillment, the risk there is, what if people don't buy it? Or what if people can't find how to buy it? In the production process, some of the risks are, can we make it consistent enough with the recipe that we have and with the suppliers that we have? When it comes to contracting producers to get the product made, one of the risks is, will they have reliable production capacity to get enough made when they need it? And when it comes to marketing, we're going to focus on that a little bit later, about getting deeper into what internal problems may exist. And when it comes to external factors, the two that I really think are important and they really worked through were estimating customer demand, with the risk being, what do we do if we overproduce compared to the demand of our community? And regulatory compliance. The risk being, what if we miss a regulation and we have to start this process over? So these are some of the risks that I assume they worked through with these kinds of products, since we're dealing with food products and we're dealing with an existing community base. But you might have thought of a couple of others. One example in particular is the risk of not selling the product quickly enough and having to pay additional costs for storage. If you plan to sell 1,000 items and ship them to your customers within 2 months of production, what happens if it takes 6 months to sell these products? How much could storage cost? What else could be done to get these products out the door more quickly? On balance, would it be better to run out of stock and not be able to sell it to your community, or to have too much excess that you have to store for a long time? On a similar note, and your accountants and treasurers will love it if you're thinking about this, what if your products don't sell quickly enough and you have to account for the capital that you have stored within your inventory and you don't have access to it for other purposes? What if you budgeted with an assumed rate of sales and have to find alternate funding sources to cash flow your operations while the existing inventory is waiting to be sold? With these examples, you'll be better prepared if you know how likely each of these risks are and what level of change they would require within the organization if they occur, as well as having plans to both prevent the risks from happening and reduce the impact of these risks if they do occur. Finally, you should have plans for how you respond if these risks do happen, so that you don't have to both create and execute a plan in a very short time frame. This is what we'll be working towards for the remainder of this workshop. And now that we've gone through some examples, we're going to move to an activity where you list out the potential risks that come with your product development process. For this activity, please list out the most common risks that you expect to encounter. For each risk, please be as specific as you can about what could happen and how it would be a problem for your plans. And one last thing before we start. Risks are not tasks. They're a potential downside or consequence that may occur. Sometimes when I run this activity, people will say, marketing is a risk. Marketing is not a risk. It's a function of the business or the organization. It's a task to be done. There are risks in that area, to be sure, but it's not a risk on its own. We could rephrase it as, our marketing doesn't connect with customers. Our marketing is too expensive per customer, or low quality marketing impacts our brand reputation. Those are risks with stakes. When you're writing out your risks, other people reading them should immediately understand what's at stake if the risks do come to pass. Now, for the rest of the activities in this workshop, we're going to be using a 6-column table. Each risk will be an horizontal row, and we'll be filling it out section by section. The header for column 1 is risks. The header for column 2 is internal or external. Column 3 is likelihood. Column 4 is severity. And column 5 is prevention errors. Column 6 is contingency plans. Now, please take 5 minutes, go and write out between 7 and 10 risks that are possible around your product, and write out the likelihood that they'll happen from 1 to 10, with 10 being the most likely. To help ground your likelihood numbers, a score of 10 is a common occurrence that you expect to happen regularly, about once a week or once a month. A score of 5 is something that has about a 50% chance of happening every year or two, and a 1 in likelihood is something rare that has a 10% chance of happening within 10 years. Really low chance. So now go ahead, write out those 7 to 10 risks and give them a likelihood score. Now for each risk you've identified, please label them as internal or external risks. Internal risks are those that you have control over, the conditions and circumstances around them. External risks are those that exist outside of the organization and you can't reasonably control them. Once you've marked down internal or external for each of your risks, then please mark down how severe each of the risks will be to your efforts on another 1 to 10 scale, with 1 being an inconsequential or an annoyance, 5 being you require deliberate change to your organizational model, and a 10 is a threat to the whole initiative with lasting effects afterwards. When we plan around risks, we include both plans for prevention as well as contingency plans. This way we can reduce the likelihood and/or the severity of some risks and have plans for how to deal with the risks when they occur. Prevention plans usually look like creating policy, performing measurement and research in advance, or efforts such as improving customer service or production processes. Through these efforts, it's less likely that something will go wrong, reducing the likelihood of the risk. And if it does happen, we've already prevented some of the worst effects that it might have had. So the overall negative impact on our work should be less than it would be otherwise. Contingency plans, on the other hand, include efforts such as having safety plans in the place for emergencies, and having designated staff or board members to communicate on behalf of the organization. It could also look like having specific refund or customer service policies for customers with negative experiences. The contingency plans should be in place to reduce the ongoing negative effects of the risks after they do happen, and prevent a full loss of the organization as you work through some of the more severe situations. Now, time to look across all of your risks and put down some preventative measures and contingency plans. Please write out 2 to 4 prevention efforts for each risk and 2 to 4 elements of what a contingency plan would look like for each of those risks. And we'll take 20 minutes for this activity. All right, now with this work complete, you will be in a better position to be able to start your product development journey, and with a better chance of having positive outcomes and avoiding preventable risks. If you'd like to watch the rest of the series, please subscribe or click on the link in the description for the full Steps to a Sale-Ready Product workshop series. You can find more about us at strategymadesimple.ca, and LITE can be found at lite.mb.ca. The links to both of these sites can also be found down in the description. Thank you again to LITE for partnering with us to produce these workshops. And the next workshop in the series will be on prototyping and MVPs, and I hope you'll join us for that as well.